Stories and Documentary Network.
Imagine a world where empires stretched across continents, cities gleamed with gold, and trade routes crisscrossed deserts, seas, and mountains. This was the Late Bronze Age, a period of unparalleled prosperity and connection. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Aegean were not isolated kingdoms. They were vibrant nodes in an intricate network of commerce, diplomacy, and culture. Luxury goods traveled thousands of miles. Ideas, technologies, and art moved alongside them, shaping civilizations in ways we are still uncovering today. And then, almost overnight, it vanished. Palaces burned, ports were abandoned. Trade routes, once bustling with ships and caravans, fell silent. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse, a mysterious unraveling of the interconnected world around 1200 BCE. Cities that had stood for centuries were suddenly deserted, and knowledge was lost, leaving behind ruins and enigmatic artifacts as the only witnesses. What triggered such a sudden fall? Was it invasions, natural disasters, or internal decay, or perhaps a combination of forces no one fully understands? As we journey through the forgotten trade routes of prehistoric societies, we seek to uncover the story of a civilization on the edge of disappearance, and the shadowy currents that swept it into history's abyss. The Late Bronze Age was not just a story of kings and conquests, it was a story of connection. Across the Mediterranean and Near East, empires thrived because they traded. They built networks that stretched from the Nile Valley to the rugged mountains of Anatolia, from the bustling Aegean ports to the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. Every city, every harbor, every caravan station was part of a vast web linking distant lands. Egypt, under the New Kingdom, was a colossal force in trade and diplomacy. Pharaohs like Ramses II maintained extensive relations with neighboring kingdoms, sending and receiving gifts that testified to their wealth and influence. Gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animals traveled from sub-Saharan Africa to Egyptian courts. Egyptian ships sailed along the Red Sea, connecting them to the incense and spice routes of Arabia. These trade networks were not merely economic, they were lifelines, sustaining cities, armies, and palaces. Mesopotamia, the cradle of writing and urban civilization, also flourished as a center of commerce. City-states like Ur, Babylon, and Assur controlled trade along the Tigris and Euphrates, facilitating the movement of tin, copper, lapis lazuli, and precious textiles. Cuneiform tablets from this period reveal complex agreements, contracts, and shipments, showing that Mesopotamians understood the art of international trade and its delicate balance. Even distant Anatolia and the Levant were tied to these systems through caravans and riverine transport. Meanwhile, the Hittites in Anatolia occupied a strategic position, controlling key overland routes between east and west. Their lands were rich in metals, particularly iron and silver, commodities highly sought after across the ancient world. Hittite caravans moved these materials to Mediterranean ports, where they could be exchanged for luxury goods, timber, or exotic raw materials. The Hittites' influence was not limited to trade. They were also formidable diplomats, negotiating treaties with Egypt and Babylon that often included clauses about the exchange of goods, illustrating how commerce and politics were deeply entwined. In the Aegean, the Mycenaeans projected their power both through conquest and commerce. Palaces such as Mycenae and Tiryns were adorned with artifacts from Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia. Gold jewelry, painted pottery, and intricately carved ivory figurines indicate that Mycenaean trade reached far beyond the Greek mainland. Sea travel was perilous, yet Mycenaean ships ventured into the open Mediterranean, linking islands and ports in a network that prefigured the later maritime empires of classical antiquity. Further south, the Minoans of Crete were pioneers of maritime trade. Their palace at Knossos was a hub of economic activity, storing grain, olive oil, pottery, and luxury goods from across the Mediterranean. Frescoes depict bustling harbors, ships laden with cargo, and merchants negotiating deals, images that bring to life the vibrant exchange of culture and wealth. Minoan traders carried not just goods, but ideas, spreading artistic styles, religious concepts, and technological innovations that would influence neighboring societies. Phoenicia, emerging toward the end of the Bronze Age, exemplified the transformative power of seafaring commerce. Cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos became synonymous with trade and navigation. Phoenicians built sturdy ships and developed efficient trade practices, carrying cedar wood, textiles, glass, and purple dye across vast distances. Their network stretched along the Levantine coast and deep into the Mediterranean, connecting with Egypt, Cyprus, and the Aegean. Through these exchanges, the Phoenicians became conduits of culture as well as commerce, transmitting knowledge, religious practices, and even alphabetic writing systems. Trade was more than a transactional endeavor. It was a lifeblood connecting otherwise isolated civilizations. It fostered alliances, ensured the flow of critical resources, and encouraged the spread of knowledge. Yet this interconnectedness was a double-edged sword. While it brought prosperity, it also made these societies vulnerable. A disruption in one region, whether through invasion, famine, or natural disaster, could ripple across continents. The fall of Ugarit in the Levant, the abandonment of Mycenaean palaces, and the decline of Hittite cities illustrate how fragile this network truly was. The archaeological record underscores this fragility. Shipwrecks like Uluburun, dating to the 14th century BCE, reveal cargoes from multiple regions. Cypriot copper, Canaanite jars, Egyptian ivory, and Mycenaean pottery, all aboard a single vessel. Such evidence highlights the scale and sophistication of Bronze Age trade and hints at what was lost when these networks collapsed. By understanding these interwoven networks, we see that the Bronze Age collapse was not merely a political or military event. It was an economic and cultural rupture of unprecedented scale. A single catastrophe could ripple through this fragile web, silencing ports, emptying markets, and bringing centuries of accumulated knowledge to a standstill. And yet, despite the devastation, traces of these connections endure in the archaeological record. The question remains, what force, natural, human, or unknown, could have brought such a thriving, interconnected world to its knees almost overnight? Trade in the late Bronze Age was more than an economic necessity. It was the lifeblood of civilizations, a channel through which wealth, culture, and ideas flowed. Imagine bustling ports along the Mediterranean, where ships laden with treasures from distant lands bobbed in the harbors. Each vessel carried stories of human ingenuity, ambition, and curiosity, connecting societies that otherwise would have remained strangers. Metals were the foundation of this exchange. Copper and tin, when alloyed, produced the bronze that defined the era. These metals were not uniformly available, making long-distance trade essential. Cyprus, Anatolia, and the Levant were rich in copper, while tin came from regions as distant as modern-day Afghanistan or the Iberian Peninsula. The movement of these metals fueled not only the production of weapons and tools, but also economic interdependence among civilizations. Pottery served as both utilitarian and cultural artifacts. Mycenaean amphorae traveled to Egypt and the Levant, while Minoan pottery was found in coastal towns of Anatolia. Each shard tells a story of artisanship, preference, and the cross-pollination of artistic styles. A painted vessel could journey thousands of miles, carrying with it the aesthetic sensibilities and symbolic meanings of its homeland. Textiles, delicate and luxurious, were highly prized commodities. Fine linen from Egypt, dyed wool from Anatolia, and embroidered fabrics from the Levant adorned the elite of multiple civilizations. Such goods were markers of status, but also vehicles of technological knowledge, as weaving techniques and patterns spread along with the fabrics themselves. Luxury items, ivory, amber, perfumes, and semi-precious stones, traveled across deserts and seas, signaling wealth and political alliances. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan found its way into the tombs of Egyptian pharaohs, while exotic animals like baboons and giraffes were presented as diplomatic gifts. Trade was not merely about commerce. It was a medium of soft power, a way to demonstrate influence and cultivate relationships across borders. The exchange of ideas accompanied these goods. Religious symbols, artistic motifs, and even writing systems moved along trade routes. The Minoans influenced Mycenaean architecture. Hittite administrative practices shaped Levantine governance, and Egyptian motifs appeared in Aegean art. Trade was a conduit for innovation, fostering cultural synthesis that enriched every society it touched. Yet with every caravan and ship, the interconnectedness of these civilizations grew, and so did their vulnerability. These same trade networks, which had sustained prosperity for centuries, became fragile lifelines. A disruption in one region could cascade across continents, silencing harbors and emptying markets. And when the Bronze Age networks collapsed, the flow of goods, ideas, and cultures came to an abrupt halt. The question lingers: what could have torn such a sophisticated system apart so suddenly? By the late 13th century BCE, the thriving network of Bronze Age civilizations began to unravel. The collapse was neither gradual nor isolated. It was catastrophic, a near-simultaneous downfall of empires stretching from the Aegean to Mesopotamia and from Egypt to Anatolia. What force, or combination of forces, could have brought such a vibrant, interconnected world to its knees? Invasions by the Sea Peoples loom large in historical records as one of the most dramatic catalysts. Egyptian hieroglyphs describe fierce seafaring raiders attacking coastal cities and destabilizing trade. Their origin remains a mystery. Were they displaced peoples, mercenaries, or a coalition of maritime warriors exploiting weakened states? Regardless, their sudden assault struck at the heart of the economic and political systems, leaving cities burned and populations scattered. Climate change compounded the chaos. Paleoclimatic studies suggest a prolonged drought in the eastern Mediterranean, leading to failed harvests, famine, and social unrest. A shrinking food supply would have strained urban centers, weakened armies, and fueled migrations, creating pressure on already vulnerable societies. Rivers that once sustained life became unreliable, forcing communities to abandon cities and search for more hospitable lands. Economic instability further eroded resilience. The late Bronze Age economy depended on complex trade networks. The disruption of key routes, whether by piracy, warfare, or environmental disaster, caused shortages of essential materials like tin and copper, crippling the production of bronze weapons and tools. Inflation, resource scarcity, and declining trade confidence would have reverberated through every corner of these empires, intensifying social tensions. Internal revolts and political instability also played a crucial role. Societies facing economic hardship and environmental stress often turned inward. Peasant uprisings, palace coups, or regional rebellions weakened central authority. Cities that had relied on strong rulers and organized administration could not coordinate defense or sustain trade when internal order broke down. The sudden abandonment of palaces in Mycenae and Ugarit suggests that internal strife may have amplified the impact of external pressures. Natural disasters, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and floods added to the turmoil. The eruption of Thera, Santorini, in the 16th century BCE, though earlier, left lingering scars, and seismic activity in Anatolia and the Levant destabilized settlements. Such events disrupted infrastructure, destroyed ports, and rendered long-distance trade hazardous, further isolating civilizations. The interplay of these factors created a perfect storm. None acted in isolation. Invasions, famine, economic collapse, political unrest, and natural disasters interacted, amplifying the effects of each. A city weakened by drought could not defend itself from invaders. Trade disruptions caused shortages that sparked revolts. One catastrophe triggered another, cascading across the fragile network of interconnected states. The evidence of this cataclysm is etched in ruins and artifacts. Burn layers in cities like Ugarit, Hattusa, and Mycenae testify to sudden destruction. Abandoned harbors and empty warehouses speak of disrupted commerce. Texts fall silent where records once chronicled diplomacy and trade, signaling the disappearance of bureaucratic and administrative systems. Yet even amidst collapse, threads of survival remain. Some communities adapted, retreating into smaller, self-sufficient settlements. Others migrated, spreading knowledge and techniques that would shape the emerging Iron Age. The collapse was devastating, yes, but it was also a turning point, clearing the stage for new civilizations and innovations. And still, many questions linger. Were the Sea Peoples merely opportunistic marauders, or harbingers of a deeper systemic failure? Could a single prolonged drought alone have triggered such widespread ruin? Or does the answer lie in a confluence of factors, each reinforcing the other until the Bronze Age world crumbled like sand through fingers? As we piece together the evidence, the mystery endures. The trade routes that once connected kings and merchants, deserts and seas, wealth and knowledge, vanished almost overnight. Their disappearance reshaped the ancient world, leaving echoes of a civilization that thrived and fell in a matter of decades. To understand the vanished world of the Late Bronze Age, we turn to the stones, ruins, and texts that survive. Archaeology and ancient writings are our guides, piecing together the intricate networks of trade, diplomacy, and culture that once spanned continents. Shipwrecks offer some of the most striking evidence of long-distance trade. The Uluburun shipwreck, off the coast of modern-day Turkey, dates to around 1300 BCE and contains a staggering diversity of goods. Cypriot copper ingots, Canaanite jars, Egyptian ivory, Mycenaean pottery, and even ostrich eggshells. This cargo demonstrates that trade was both extensive and highly organized, linking regions separated by thousands of miles. Another shipwreck at Cape Gelidonia further reinforces the notion of Mediterranean maritime connectivity, showing that goods, ideas, and people moved with remarkable sophistication. Ports and harbors themselves speak volumes. Excavations at Kamos in Crete and Tel Sukas in Syria reveal bustling trade hubs where merchants exchanged textiles, pottery, and metals. These locations were not mere points of departure or arrival. They were centers of negotiation, finance, and cultural transmission. Traders' inscriptions, weights, and seals found in these ports testify to an economic and bureaucratic sophistication that rivals much later periods. Ancient texts provide another layer of evidence. Egyptian hieroglyphs and Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets meticulously document shipments, diplomatic gifts, and trade agreements. Letters from Ugarit, for instance, record the exchange of tin for copper, detailing quantities, routes, and even the names of merchants. These texts reveal a delicate balance. Commerce was inseparable from diplomacy, and the loss of trade routes could destabilize entire empires. Artifacts recovered far from their points of origin illuminate cultural exchange. Minoan pottery appears in Anatolia and Egypt. Mycenaean swords and jewelry have been found in the Levant, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan reached Egyptian tombs. These objects are silent witnesses to a network of connectivity that extended across seas, deserts, and mountains. Each piece tells a story of ambition, craftsmanship, and human ingenuity, a civilization linked not only by economy, but by shared creativity. Yet amidst this evidence of prosperity, the signs of collapse are stark. Burn layers in cities such as Ugarit, Hattusa, and Mycenae reveal violent destruction. Abandoned ports, empty warehouses, and silent palaces hint at disrupted commerce and lost governance. The sudden discontinuation of writing in certain regions, like Linear B in the Mycenaean world, marks a cultural rupture whose consequences would last centuries. Even the gaps in the archaeological record themselves are telling. Some sites simply vanish from history, leaving archaeologists to speculate about lost cities and forgotten trade networks. Was this sudden disappearance caused by external invasions, internal strife, environmental disaster, or a combination of these forces? The clues are scattered, fragmentary, and tantalizingly incomplete, preserving the mystery of a world that once thrived but abruptly fell silent. The evidence, both material and textual, paints a picture of a complex, interconnected society suddenly undone. Yet these ruins do more than mark destruction. They remind us of the sophistication, ambition, and human drama of a world whose reach extended across continents and whose echoes still resonate today. When the dust settled over the Mediterranean and Near Eastern world, the consequences of the Bronze Age collapse were profound and far-reaching. The sophisticated networks of trade, governance, and culture were shattered, leaving behind a world that had to rebuild itself from the ashes. Urban centers, once thriving hubs of commerce and culture, fell into decline. Cities like Mycenae, Hattusa, and Ugarit were abandoned, their monumental palaces left to decay. Streets that had once thrummed with merchants, scribes, and artisans became silent. The collapse of urban life forced populations to migrate into smaller villages, creating a more fragmented and localized social landscape. This marked a sharp departure from centuries of centralization, as surviving communities adapted to self-sufficiency. Economic networks disintegrated. Trade routes that had carried tin from Anatolia, copper from Cyprus, and luxury goods from Egypt suddenly vanished. Without these arteries of commerce, societies lost access to essential materials and exotic luxuries. Metallurgy declined, and the production of bronze tools and weapons slowed dramatically. Scarcity forced innovation in some areas, but overall, the world became less interconnected and more insular. Cultural consequences were equally significant. Writing systems like Linear B in the Aegean disappeared, erasing administrative and historical records. Rituals, artistic traditions, and architectural techniques faded or evolved in isolation. In some cases, local cultures adapted and flourished independently, giving rise to new identities that would define the Iron Age. However, much knowledge, technological, artistic, and scientific, was lost forever. Social structures shifted dramatically. The collapse undermined centralized authorities, weakening royal power and elite hierarchies. In some regions, peasant and tribal communities assumed greater autonomy. Leadership became localized, less formalized, and often more resilient to external shocks. The loss of centralized governance may have slowed recovery in some regions, but it also created space for new political formations and cultural renaissances in the centuries that followed. Technological and economic adaptation began slowly. With bronze scarce and long-distance trade disrupted, societies increasingly turned to iron. The Iron Age emerged from the ruins of the Bronze Age, characterized by new metallurgical skills, smaller but more resilient settlements, and localized trade systems. While the collapse closed one chapter, it set the stage for the innovations and social transformations that would define the next millennium. Despite the devastation, echoes of the Bronze Age persisted. Trade slowly resumed along surviving routes. Cultural influences continued to intermingle, and memories of the lost civilizations lingered in myths, stories, and the remnants of art and architecture. Yet the sudden disappearance of these networks left a haunting question. How could such a sophisticated, interconnected world vanish almost overnight? The Bronze Age collapse serves as both a cautionary tale and a testament to human resilience. It reminds us that prosperity, no matter how advanced, is fragile. Connections that bind civilizations can also magnify vulnerability, and the loss of trade, culture, and knowledge can ripple across societies in ways that shape history for centuries. The world that emerged from this collapse was different, smaller, less interconnected, and marked by the scars of what had been lost. Yet the story of these vanished networks, the civilizations that built them, and the mysteries that surround their sudden fall continues to captivate, drawing us into the shadowy currents of a world that once thrived, then vanished into history's enigmatic silence. Despite decades of research, the Bronze Age collapse remains a puzzle with pieces scattered across ruins, shipwrecks, and fragmented texts. While invasions, climate change, and economic instability offer partial explanations, alternative theories continue to emerge, challenging our understanding of this enigmatic period. Some scholars speculate that cosmic events may have played a role. Unexplained layers of burned settlements, tree ring anomalies, and sudden climate shifts suggest that meteors, comets, or solar phenomena could have impacted the ancient world. Could a celestial strike have triggered drought, fire, or famine across vast regions? The evidence is circumstantial, yet it sparks the imagination, hinting at forces beyond human control influencing history. Others propose internal revolutions as a hidden force behind the collapse. Archaeologists note the abrupt abandonment of palaces and administrative centers in Mycenae, Ugarit, and Hattusa. Was this the result of peasants or disenfranchised factions rising against elites? Perhaps widespread civil unrest, fueled by economic and environmental pressures, undermined political stability simultaneously across multiple regions, a synchronized unraveling of societies from within. Disease and epidemic theories also offer compelling possibilities. A series of plagues could have decimated populations, weakening cities and armies, and making them vulnerable to invasion. While evidence is fragmentary, skeletal remains showing signs of illness in certain regions hint at a silent but deadly adversary that may have moved along trade routes, spreading devastation unseen. Then there are the lost trade routes and forgotten civilizations, whispers of which emerge only in tantalizing fragments. Archaeologists have uncovered isolated settlements, mysterious artifacts, and inscriptions that do not fit neatly into known maps of the Bronze Age. Were there civilizations whose names and records were obliterated by the collapse, leaving us to reconstruct their story from scattered clues? Some believe hidden routes across deserts or seas carried goods and knowledge long before we had records, and their disappearance may have compounded the shock of the collapse. Even the enigmatic sea peoples remain a mystery. Were they marauders displaced by climate change, refugees seeking new lands, or mercenaries exploiting weakened civilizations? Ancient texts and Egyptian reliefs depict their invasions, yet their origins and motivations are still debated. The sea peoples could have been both agents and symbols of a wider systemic failure, moving along trade routes that had already begun to fray. Ultimately, the Bronze Age collapse defies simple explanation. It was likely not a single cause, but a cascading confluence of crises: natural, social, economic, and possibly cosmic. The gaps in the record challenge historians and archaeologists alike. For every city uncovered, there are lost settlements. For every artifact found, countless others have vanished. This persistent uncertainty fuels the allure of the period, drawing us into a world of vanished empires, silent harbors, and trade routes that once linked the known world. The lingering mysteries of this era invite us to ponder deeper questions. How fragile is human civilization in the face of compounding crises? What knowledge, art, and culture has been forever lost to time? And what truths remain buried, awaiting discovery beneath sands, seas, and ruins? The Bronze Age collapse remains one of history's most captivating enigmas. In a span of decades, the interconnected civilizations of the Mediterranean and Near East, the Mycenaeans, Minoans, Hittites, Egyptians, and countless smaller cultures, fell into ruin. Trade routes that once hummed with ships, caravans, and merchants fell silent. Cities, palaces, and ports were abandoned, leaving behind only ruins and artifacts as testimony to a vanished world. Yet even in their disappearance, these civilizations continue to speak to us. Every shipwreck, pottery shard, and cuneiform tablet reveals a fragment of a network that connected empires across continents. Luxury goods and exotic materials tell stories of ambition, creativity, and the human desire to connect with distant lands. They remind us that trade was not merely commerce. It was a lifeline, a conduit of ideas, and a thread weaving together the fabric of human history. The collapse transformed the world. Urban centers shrank, trade diminished, and cultural continuity fractured. But from the ruins, new civilizations emerged. The Iron Age rose from the ashes, shaped by lessons learned, knowledge preserved, and adaptations made. The story of the Bronze Age collapse is thus both a cautionary tale and a testament to resilience. As we walk among the ruins, study the artifacts, and read the texts of this enigmatic era, we are left with awe and curiosity. The lost trade routes, vanished cities, and forgotten civilizations whisper across time, reminding us of both the fragility and endurance of human achievement. In their silence, they challenge us to imagine what once was, and what might yet be rediscovered. The Bronze Age may have ended abruptly, but its echoes continue to resonate, leaving an indelible mark on our understanding of history, trade, and the enduring mystery of civilizations lost to time.